So while I was initially trying to brainstorm and write for my review of Iron Harvest, King Art Games announced a lot of new features and potential balance tweaks that they were going to implement in the next year. And so I felt super weird about writing a review of my experience that potentially had a less than like 12-month expiration date that I knew about beforehand, especially because some of the new features that they announced, like a kind of like conquest mode and some new game modes, might address some of the issues that I have with the game as it stands now. And I'm just not sure if I could just like do a full on review. So instead, I'm just kind of doing this not review or maybe a review in progress that I just kind of have going forward with it. The other reason that I'm not really calling this a review is that I didn't actually finish Iron Harvest, and I feel like it's important to either get to some kind of end credits or at the very least put in more time than I did in order for me to feel like I could come to a fair conclusion. That said, even though I bounced off due to some frustrations with how the game handled difficulty, I'm still happy that I bought this game and happy that I experienced with it. And if like I would go back in time and, ask myself, hey, should I get this game even though I'm super frustrated? I'd be like, yeah, no, totally check it out. It's still worth having this frustrating experience, if that makes any kind of sense. And if someone were to ask me if I should get this because they like steampunk and want to try an RTS, then yeah, go for it. Even if it is a little hard, just give it a shot. It's pretty cool. Like the main reason that I bounced off is that in the middle of playing through my Polania campaign, the developers released a patch that tuned the AI to make it smarter and more aggressive across all difficulty settings. And this tuning pass was met with mixed reception. Most skirmish players were actually super happy with medium and hard because they were made a little bit more difficult and a little bit more dynamic. However, this tuning also applied to easy, and a lot of players who really just kind of wanted a super casual experience felt that the easy was way too punishing at that point. A lot of people felt that the easy difficulty was now basically roughly where the previous patch's hard difficulty was. And King Art was receptive to this kind of thing and said that they were going to release an update. But by the time the update came out, I had already bounced off the game and I just couldn't find the motivation to return to it. And again, part of the reason why I bounced off is because, well, ironically, these changes to the AI in Skirmish also ended up affecting the campaign. And so the campaign got way harder on its normal difficulty. I even bumped it down to easy at some point just because I was just kind of so frustrated that I just kind of wanted to get through it. But the way that easy is tuned is that you just kind of get some free veterancy levels for your units, which is nice, but it doesn't really feel like you have that much of a meaningful advantage over a smart, clever, and aggressive AI that has infinite units spawned through various campaign and story triggers. That said, it wasn't all bad, right? Because I would sit down and be playing against the AI. I'd be dealing with them. I'd like come with a clever strategy, maybe do a choke point, and I would literally see the AI adapt to what I was doing in some like really, really cool ways. And every time I would lose, at least it would be accompanied by this moment of, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Based on what the AI was doing, it just was followed by an intense amount of frustration of, oh my God, I just lost like 45 minutes to an hour of time because I feel like the checkpoint that I reached left me in a bad spot. So I have to restart the whole mission over and try a completely different strategy. Or worse, I don't even know how to respond to what the AI just did. This feels really unfair and insurmountable. Um, and that's basically just kind of where I was at the end of the game there when I was kind of playing through Polonia, and I just kind of bounced off. But really, this kind of reminded me of the fact that I like deeply miss cheat codes. I mean, I've played RTS games since I was like 7 or 8, but that doesn't mean that I played them in some kind of MLG pro sport level. It was always very casually as I want to play through these stories and I just kind of want to get through each mission to see how the story presents itself. So I'd use all kinds of cheats like the Cobra car in Age of Empires or um, Power Overwhelming in StarCraft. You just kind of sit there, build my units and then smash them into the enemy units and just kind of have a good time. Um, and the I feel like the industry has kind of moved away from cheat codes, which I feel like is pretty rough. And because those cheats were a big part of why I fell in love with RTS games and the RTS genre as a child. And to give a kind of similar context, at the same time as I was playing Iron Harvest, I had just finished playing Company of Heroes. And that game plays very similarly to Iron Harvest. It's also similarly difficult. And unlike Iron Harvest, I don't remember it having difficulty settings that you could select. But what it does have are cheat codes. And I remember my time with the with Company of Heroes much more fondly than I remember my time with Iron Harvest, exclusively because I could cheat my way through the campaign. Um, and I feel like that's just kind of something that Iron Harvest could have like taken advantage of if they just kind of had some basic cheat codes, like maybe like infinite resources or infinite supply or God mode for your units, or like max out their ranking, or just something that I could do to just sort of act as an escape valve for moments in which I'm just like, I just can't do this, and I don't want to lose 45 minutes to an hour of my time trying to restart the mission to figure out how it works. Because when you restart a mission 5 times, that's 5 hours you've lost, and that feels really really bad. Um, but like beyond that, I also feel that like cheat codes are something that people who are really fond of strategy games can also just kind of use to explore the game in a whole bunch of different ways, right? Like if I cheat through a mission, it's not like totally fruitless. I'm learning what the triggers and the missions are. I may understand how the map is set up. That might give me ideas for how to play and beat it when I don't want to cheat through the missions or anything like that, to give myself some time later, which is something that I've done with lots of games that I've revisited more recently, is that I'll cheat my way through them a little bit, then I'll try to like beat them fairly a little bit. And the cheat codes allow me to understand the nuances and rhythms of the campaign in a way that if I had just banged my head against the wall just wouldn't have really worked. And that's, not counting things of potentially using cheat codes to do things like testing how units matchups work, or skipping some aspect of the economy because you just want to like see the certain mechanical interactions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I just feel like it's a big missed opportunity that developers are just kind of not leveraging when they could. Um, and Especially for something like Iron Harvest, because even though it is like a tutorial campaign, right? Like their storytelling and presentation is just flat out way better than Company of Heroes, and like the way that they do cutscenes is almost like Blizzard Entertainment's. Like if they had Blizzard money, I would not be surprised if they could easily just trivially pull out a kind of like Heart of the Swarm opening cinematic kind of quality of cutscenes with these cool ass mechs, right? Um, and that's just kind of something that just my inability just kind of just to check that out was just like hampered by the overall difficulty. And like the only thing that I really have a complaint about the nature of their campaign is that it is a tutorial campaign. And well, that's not bad because most RTS games have some kind of tutorial campaign. I just kind of found that kind of design a little antiquated, right? Like the the traditional tutorial campaign was powered like super iterated on by Blizzard and StarCraft 2, where they kind of give you this choose your own adventure feel, where you have a collection of missions that you can do in kind of any order to allow you to unlock certain units. And then those missions will usually be a kind of unit showcase that gives you an opportunity to understand what the relative strengths and weaknesses are of those units in a really fun and creative way. And it also gives you kind of like a feeling of agency or ownership over the army that you were using. And then you can just like further augment it with various like challenges and research and tech and stuff like that. But that's sort of absent in this. It's just a very standard, you go from mission A to B to C to D, you unlock your army along the way, and you're given various like small scenarios. And I feel like that's just like not where I want campaigns to necessarily be. On the flip hand, like I'm pretty satisfied if you have a kind of a grand strategy or 4X campaign, kind of like how the Total War series does it, where there's like this huge strategic layer where you have to capture territory, and capturing that territory influences your ability to fight in future skirmish map campaigns against an AI who is also trying to do the same thing. I'm cool with that. I think that's interesting. I think there's a lot of potential there. I just anything that isn't just a straight tutorial campaign, because I always feel like tutorial campaigns, and they're always marketed as campaigns designed to tutorialize the various factions, fail as tutorials, and if they like just universally. Um, and especially if they succeed as a fun story single player campaign. They're just too slow and clunky. And if you really wanted to create a series of tutorials that allow people to understand the factions in intimate ways, to understand unit compositions and things like that, then I think you're actually better off scrapping a tutorial campaign and just making a sick arcade mode where you just create certain circumstances where players are able to utilize certain resources and meet certain challenges, and then you just kind of grade them on their success. And I feel like that's way better and more educational than just a regular ass like tutorial campaign that's just kind of super common. That's of course not something that like I'm holding against Iron Harvest too much. This is just me literally yelling at a cloud, because there's lots of reasons to why you would do tutorial campaign. Like honestly, King Art Games is not Blizzard Entertainment. They're not Relic. They don't have Activision or Sega backing their production. So they don't really necessarily have the money to go about and just invest in iterating their design. And that's just kind of me just sort of grousing at someone making a very reasonable production decision, that I just kind of felt like complaining about. I mean, because again, it's just not their fault. It's just the that the situation is that the RTS genre is just like really weird, right? The market is so underserved that you are better off trying to replicate a style of gameplay from the past rather than do something experimental or way out there, because people don't want something new necessarily. They want something familiar tweaked a little bit, right? And um, this is partly because like the RTS genre really isn't dead as much as it's been defunded. Like, because like in spite of how expensive and difficult it is to make an RTS in terms of complexity, like the only thing that might be more complex is like a sandbox Star Wars Galaxy style MMO, and even then I'm not sure, because most RTS games have a competitive multiplayer requirement, so the networking challenge is still present, right? Um, but either way, there have been smaller developers making RTS games for almost as long as the RTS genre has existed, and we've just kind of had a small, consistent, kind of strain of different games is kind of getting released. Unfortunately, these smaller developers, they don't have the money to pour into super experimental design or necessarily marketing to the press, and so they're just kind of stuck in a cage, so to speak, because almost every single major AAA publisher has abandoned the genre and left a lot of beloved historic franchises to collect dust. And this has a ton of consequences. It creates a perception that the genre is dead without any meaningful active development, and that in turn causes like passionate and dedicated market people who just like really want to buy RTS games to get underserved, because both marketing and the press just fail to let them know of all the smaller developers working on games they might be interested in. This also, in turn, just limits the growth of the RTS community, because only big AAA studios tend to have the money and resources to um, actually invest and prioritize their game for a kind of mass market appeal. And this tends to express itself with games that are usually more accessible, either through literal accessibility features or just more polished design and approachable to newcomers, than just kind of the more current, really passionate artistic art house projects of people who really love playing old style strategy games in a really hardcore, high level way. The games made by smaller devs tend to be more difficult and complex, and even if they are iterative, they tend to be more inventive. But that can also be a barrier to entry to someone who's never heard of an RTS game, and is kind of curious to try, but is really, really put off by um, the level of complexity or just the sheer difficulty of just kind of getting everything to work. And of course, there's also an issue of preservation, because even in a world with remakes and remasters, um, that just kind of happen in almost every single genre, we're only getting a small handful of RTS remakes, and some of them are even of questionable quality. Like if EA and Activision aren't interested in preserving the history of like some of the most significant RTS franchises ever made, then like there's very little hope of even some of the smaller like developers that are still around to just be able to preserve their own thing and just kind of resell it reasonably. Like it's possible that things are changing, and like props to Sega for continuing to fund creative assembly through their Total War franchise, and and they also have like a willingness to support Relic to make various games over the year. And more recently, Microsoft gets a little bit of credit because they realize the potential of just kind of tapping into an underserved market with the success of the definitive editions for Age of Empires and the fact that they just released Age of Empires 4. And so I'm a bit hopeful for the future and excited about what could happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if all the funding dries up after Homeworld 3. Of course, that's just, all of that was just like a major tangent. At the end of the day, this was supposed to be a kind of meandering thought on Iron Harvest, a cool game with a cool setting that was ultimately very frustrating for me. But if you want to pick it up, definitely get it, especially because it always goes on sale. Um, Thanks for watching.